Hello and welcome. As I am a very huge fan of The Doors, I have collected quite a lot of stuff related to them, including books, and I've tried to make my collection as useful and as informative as possible because honestly there are lots of books about The Doors and especially about Jim Morrison that are basically just a waste of time. So I thought that it would be a good idea to share with you the books that I actually do have. Maybe you will find something interesting, and if you know any good ones that I don't own yet, feel free to recommend them in the comments, and let's start. The first book that I want to show you is Jim Morrison and the Doors, The Lyrics. This book focuses on the lyrics from all their studio albums, making it really useful if you want to analyze the songs beyond just listening to them. One thing I really like about this book is that at the end it reveals who actually wrote each song, because as you might know, The Doors usually credited all songs to the whole band except for the Soft Parade album, where songwriting credits were listed separately because most of the album was essentially written by Robbie Krieger. So I guess Jim was definitely the band's poetic visionary, but Krieger's contribution was just as essential to their sound, and this book makes it really clear. The second book I want to show you is The Lost Writings of James Douglas Morrison Wilderness. This book is actually a part of a 3-volume collection of Morrison poetry and writings, but I only own the first volume. It is a collection of poems, stories and essays that Jim wrote throughout his life. If you are interested in exploring his poetry beyond The Doors lyrics, this book is definitely a great place to start. I also own the collected works of Jim Morrison, but since it is such a massive and a huge book, I think it deserves a separate video. But that being said, I think that the collected works and this one, The Lost Writings, are must-haves for anyone who wants to dive deep into Jim's poetry and creative mind. The third book is Jim Morrison, An Hour of Magic, and it is actually a photojournal, which I absolutely love, because these days we are so used to seeing everything digitally on our small screens, but this book gives you the chance to experience these photos in much clearer way. Some of these images I have never even seen online, which makes it even more special. I just think that this is a really cool visual journal and a really unique addition to my collection. Next is Love Her Madly, Jim Morrison, Mary and Me. And this is kinda a story about Jim before The Doors and about his relationship with Mary Werblow. I think nowadays most people think of Pamela as the love of Jim's life, but this is actually not true, because before The Doors, Jim was deeply in love with Mary. And honestly, personally, I truly believe that he couldn't get over her until his last days, and lots of songs on The Doors' debut album are actually inspired by Mary, including the Crystal Ships and The End. And personally for me, she was also one of the most significant people in Jim's life, and I guess if she would ever wrote a book about her life with Jim, it would be a very interesting read, but unfortunately we don't have such books, so we are left only with this one. This book itself is a quick and fun read with a very nice flow, but I do question how much of it is actually fact and how much is made up. But just because I have a huge respect to Mary, who kept everything to herself, which is very incredible and inspiring for me, I just wanted to have at least one book that is about her and dedicated for her. The next book is No One Here Gets Out Alive, and I must admit this was my very first book about The Doors, and when I was reading it I had absolutely zero knowledge of the band, about Jim Morrison, and at that time it was honestly an amazing read. It was the best rock tale you could ever imagine, and if you know absolutely nothing about the Doors, this book is probably absolutely fantastic for you. It gives you this larger than life picture of the band and especially of Jim Morrison. But when I started to actually read more and learn more about the band, I realized that a lot of the stories from this book are just completely fake, and most people also from the Doors and the Doors circle are absolutely in shock from this book, because the author of the book, Danny, claims that he was the Doors manager, but he was indeed just a teenage kid who kept showing up at the Doors office until he actually got a job answering fan mails. He hadn't even graduated high school by the time Jim passed away, so despite being a huge fan of the band, he wasn't really involved in the band's creative process. But in this book, he often presents himself as an insider, but in reality he was just making up fake stories. And the worst part of all of this for me is that he created this image of Jim Morrison that is just crossing the line and very disrespectful in my opinion. Even though this book is known to be heavily sensationalized, it defined the public's perception of the Doors. That's the dilemma the Doors face to these days. The myths surrounding the bands will always persist, but at least those myths have ensured that the Doors are still remembered. This book tops the bestseller list among books about the Doors, and I guess as long as it continues to help more and more people discover the band, it is okay for this book to exist. The next one is Riders on the Storm by John Densmore. This book is the real story, said Robbie Krieger. The whole book is a kind of a deep dive into Densmore's love-hate relationship with Morrison and how he struggled to understand his place in the band while also dealing with relationship with family, women and even other rock stars. I got a huge feeling that John just wanted to be in the band like the Beatles, but what he got instead was Jim Morrison. And as you read the book, it is very clear that Densmore didn't fully enjoy the ride that he was on. But I really enjoyed reading it. John doesn't dive too much on his own self-reflection. He actually writes with a lot of insight. And of all the Doors books out there, Densmore comes off as the most honest. He is not afraid to admit who he is, what his motivations were, and where he fits into the whole Doors Morrison story. He was the hardworking drummer, maybe not the most handsome one or charming guy in the room, and maybe a little awkward, but he was also the sharp and the sober one who watched Morrison rise and fall with a clear eye. What I also like about Riders on the Storm is that probably it is the first The Doors memoir that doesn't try to glamorize Jim Morrison or to completely tear him down. John gives this pretty honest and balanced view of Morrison, considering how complicated their relationship was. And to Densmore, Morrison comes off as someone who was insanely talented, but at the same time kind of a jerk. This is, I think, definitely a must-read for The Doors fans, because, come on, this is a drummer from The Doors who published this book. Jim Morrison, A Feast of Friends, Friends Gathered Together. This book is considered to be one of the best books about Jim Morrison, and it takes you on a journey throughout the various stages of his life. Each chapter is anchored by the memories of Morrison's closest friends, covering everything from his high school days to the creation of The Doors, also the band's struggles, and many more stuff. What stands out in this book is how it portrays Morrison, not as the wild stage persona most people know, but as a deeply intelligent and gentle, compassionate man who dreamed of being more than just a rock and roll singer. His true love was poetry, and he wanted to focus on that instead of music, but his musical commitment made it very difficult for him to break free. The book also reveals Morrison's struggle with addiction, both to chemicals and most notably to alcohol. It offers a very informative, interesting and compelling look at Morrison's personality and his life. It also presents over 100 photos of Morrison and those who knew him best. Overall, the book feels like you're just sitting in a bar listening to the warm and sometimes funny stories about a guy these people used to know. And I guess the title, Friends Gathered Together, couldn't be just more fitting. And honestly, this is just a warm, beautiful book about Jim Morrison. So if you are into Jim Morrison, you should definitely look for this book. The crazy thing about The Doors is that when you compare all the books that are out there, you start to notice that there's this one core set of events that everyone agrees on, but at the same time you are left with these hugely different perspectives and stories, and you get so many conflicting impressions of who the real Jim Morrison was. You can clearly see that some of the people are still very hurt, some of the people have very big anger, but some have absolutely nothing but just a good memories about this guy. And I guess, as it often the case, the truth is probably just somewhere in the middle. This was honestly just a first half of my collection, and if you would like to see the second part, please leave a comment, and I'd also love to hear your thoughts about these books. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.